There's a great shared history across TBS and TNT. Tony Schiavone being a key voice in both products. And then a lot of similarities. I think some of the greatest high flyers in pro wrestling, as I was saying, broke in as cruiserweights in WCW, and now that style is a preeminent style worldwide.
How's it going, everyone? We got another special presentation here on the Takedown on SI. I'm John Alba, and I'm joined by, I could list off all the different titles, but let's just call him the head honcho of All Elite Wrestling, Mr. Tony Khan. Tony, really appreciate you joining us here on the Takedown on SI ahead of Dynamite 289, and I know it's a very special one for you guys as you become the longest running professional wrestling program to run consecutively on TBS or TNT. How are you, Tony?
I'm very well. Thank you, John. I'm very excited about Wednesday Night Dynamite this week because this Wednesday, just hours from now, AEW Wednesday Night Dynamite becomes the longest running primetime weekly pro wrestling show in the history of TNT and TBS, and it's a really big deal. So I'm very, very excited to talk to you about it. Thanks, John.
You are someone who has never been shy to promote yourself, promote your product, and go to war with people proverbially or quite literally in some cases. So there's no doubt here that this is an allusion to the run that Nitro had. And I know Nitro was a very influential television program for you. There are so many WCW adjacent individuals who work for AEW right now. What did you learn from Nitro's run that you've either taken with you or maybe advised against as you've promoted and produced AEW Dynamite here?
Well, I really appreciate you asking. I'm a big fan of WCW. I grew up watching the shows, and Nitro was a huge part of my childhood. And long before Nitro, I watched WCW. And I wish I could say I watched it long after, but that was kind of the end of the run. And I certainly learned a lot watching those shows. I think it's where some of the most exciting, high-flying, athletic wrestlers of all time broke in on TV and became mainstream TV stars across America. And those are some of the biggest wrestlers of all time now. And I think it really helped usher in a faster paced, more exciting style of wrestling. And I do think that over the years of Nitro, some of the most exciting moments and memories in pro wrestling happened on the show. So tons of positive memories of WCW Nitro from growing up.
Have you taken anything from, I like to use the term, the chemical makeup, if you will, of what we used to see with Nitro? It was you had the cluster endings a lot of the time. You had the cruiserweights. Like, I'm really curious what kind of influence you have taken in your mind as you've been producing Dynamite over the course of the last 6 years here.
Well, we've done so many episodes, 289 episodes as of this Wednesday. And in the hundreds of shows and hundreds of moments and memories, absolutely. I think there's a lot of great influence on WCW. The most clear one to me is that the icon in WCW and our legend, our undefeated star, certainly the person we revere so much in AEW is Sting. And I think there's a great shared history there. There's a great shared history across TBS and TNT. Tony Schiavone being a key voice in both products. And then a lot of similarities. I think some of the greatest high flyers in pro wrestling, as I was saying, broke in as cruiserweights in WCW, and now that style is a preeminent style worldwide. You saw some of the top luchadors break in on WCW, and I am a huge fan of Lucha Libre. That was not the first place I saw it. I was actually a big Lucha fan growing up, and became an even bigger fan after Nitro, when that was really the top alternative pro wrestling available on satellite. And I really, really, absolutely had so much respect for everything that it took to put Nitro on the air and keep Nitro on the air for all those years. And that's why I think this is a really important milestone. It's amazing what Nitro achieved, and to be on TNT for 288 weeks. I know how hard that is firsthand. It's really hard. And it's a celebration of everything and really all the wrestling, looking back over 50 years of wrestling on TBS specifically, and 30 years of pro wrestling on TNT. And now AEW is a huge part of that conversation. And this is a big milestone for TBS and AEW on Wednesday.
You have your feet dipped in so many different pools, but television production, live television production, wasn't one of them before Dynamite got kicked off here, and now it's on this 6-year run, or at least one of your main proponents, I should say. So what have you learned about producing episodic storytelling, specifically in the pro wrestling lens, over the last few years, and what's your approach to inter-show storytelling?
Well, it's a great question. I had maybe done a little more live TV than other people that broke into wrestling for the first time, because I've been working in sports for years.
Sure.
And have been involved. And you have a background like that yourself, John, and you understand better than 99.999% of people. There are some similarities
Absolutely.
between sports TV and wrestling. Wrestling's a sport. And when you work covering the New York Knicks, covering the New York sports teams, I'm sure some of the experiences you have in the studio analyzing and going over that information and the TV jargon and the way it works, a lot of those things, there's some similarities there. So I had done years of working in sports and being around the broadcast, involved in the broadcast. Jaguars, we actually produce our own preseason games. So in the NFL, obviously, the big networks, CBS, Fox, NBC, ESPN, they're producing the games week in, week out, and they're setting the commentary teams. But we actually produced our own preseason games. We have our own commentary teams. I've done commentary in the preseason games before. And I really, really enjoy sports TV production and coming into AEW and then following wrestling really closely. These things paired up. And so I had some knowledge base, but it goes without saying, I've learned so much about TV over the years, doing hundreds and hundreds of episodes, learning on the job. And I think from the very beginning, we've had a great fan base with AEW. There's really been excitement about this because when we launched with such a great roster of wrestlers, and the roster has grown. People were excited to hear we were bringing a 2-hour show to Wednesdays, and it's crazy. We've been doing that same 2-hour show now for 5.5 years, and set a big milestone this Wednesday. And we've added so much. We've added great stars. We've added a great program with Saturday Night Collision that's doing really, really well and has a lot of momentum right now. And it's a really exciting time for AEW, for our fans, for our wrestlers. And this is a celebration for all of us, anybody who's been involved in creating AEW, and hopefully anybody who's been involved in wrestling on TNT and TBS, to see wrestling back on the Turner networks. I know it makes a lot of fans happy, and I know it makes a lot of people who work there happy to be back in the wrestling business after all these years. There's some people at TBS and TNT that were there with WCW, and they're there with AEW. Yep. And, that's really cool. And that they've been able to come back around and get back in the business. So many cool things about this. But on Wednesday, most of all, it's going to be a great lineup. It's going to be a great show. You don't want to miss this show because there's so much great action and so many great things happening in AEW. The rivalries are red hot, and this is a great lineup of matches we have. It's going to be a great show to celebrate a great milestone this Wednesday.
No, I mean, listen, I absolutely agree in the sense that I think there are a lot of elements of traditional sports television that translate over to an arena like pro wrestling. And I think AEW has very much established itself as one of the premier organizations for providing that sports-centric style of professional wrestling, where it's very competition-based. And it's this weird dichotomy, right, Tony, where you're also having to balance character development and make sure you're leading little plot development devices that aid these characters in moving forward. So from someone who was so inspired by Nitro or the Attitude Era or ECW, what elements have you borrowed from then that have aided in how you craft stories week to week on AEW TV? I'd really love to know that.
Well, that's really a great question. I think there's so many wrestling promoters. And I've been watching wrestling and wrestling shows since I was 7, and I've been collecting wrestling from all over the continent since I was 12. And I think how a wrestling promoter or how any person in wrestling gets to the point they're at, I think it's a lot of influences, and everybody's got their own. It could be 10, 20, 6, 4, 12, however many people really influence you, and you take, 2 things from this person and 12 things from this person, and then, you learn this from someone else. And that's how I feel about wrestling. And I think a lot of different people in the wrestling business learn that way, that, they learn, they got the figure 4 from Ric Flair. They got the hairstyle from somebody else. They got, the sunglasses from Eddie Gilbert, and it's a little bit different in terms of ideas and the toolbox and presenting pro wrestling on television in different ways and all the different tricks of the trade. But I do think that over the years, I've studied and watched lots of wrestling, and I think we've put on a lot of great episodes and a lot of great shows over the years, because there's a lot of great minds who love wrestling in AEW. And then when there's a common thought, a light bulb goes off and the light comes on for everyone in the room, because everyone understands what we're trying to do and what we're trying to call upon, trying to make wrestling magic. And a lot of times it can help to look back at classic memories and classic moments in wrestling, and not just from one promotion or one place. It's a very different style of wrestling from what I watch now. If you put a gun to my head and said, you could do one thing, and I would say, well, I would present the wrestling and the wrestlers and the style maybe a little bit differently. But on the other hand, the way they were doing it was absolutely fantastic when you look back at, and when I say they, I should go back and qualify it. I'm talking about Mid-South wrestling.
Okay.
Mid-South wrestling, if I were to go back and say, there's one thing that I every few years I go back and watch, and it's a really positive influence, it's that. And the quality of the wrestling was very, very high, very high. And it's not just the stories, it was the wrestling and the stories, and it was all blended together. And I think that Mid-South wrestling is some of the best stuff to this day.
So when you hear, because you're someone who's very tuned into all the discourse that's going on, and you're in an unenviable position in the sense that no matter what you do, and this is anyone who's in a position of power, no matter what you do, you're going to have detractors, you're going to have people who support you, right? That's the nature of the beast. So when you hear Eric Bischoff, Jim Cornette, people who have live TV experience, who have been on that biggest stage, that same stage that you're on, when they offer critique, when they say criticism, how do you balance it? How much are you listening to that when you're going about putting forth your episodic week-to-week television show?
Well, I do like to listen to feedback from lots of people across pro wrestling, and especially if it's constructive, it can be really helpful. I think there's a lot of times where you hear somebody say something and they say, oh, why didn't they do it this way? And instead of going from point A to point B and then to point C, maybe in between point A and point B, they could have added this. And sometimes maybe there's a good idea there that you can use in the future. So I really do love hearing feedback from all kinds of people, from people in wrestling, wrestlers, people who worked in wrestling in the production side or both, and fans too. Fans that have never been backstage at a show in their lives, but just love wrestling and watch it a lot. And they have great ideas. So there's all kinds of different places where an idea can come from. And, I had never been backstage at a wrestling show until I was in my 30s. And I just grew up watching it and loving it and following it and, trading tapes and talking about it. So there's a lot of different places and a lot of different ways that you can get an idea about wrestling, or that you can contribute, or really, I just think it's really neat that there's people from literally all over the world in hundreds of countries that follow the same sport, and can share ideas and talk with each other. It's really cool.
It is cool, and I mean, we are in that era now where everyone does have a voice, for better or for worse. I work with Matt Hardy, and he says the best thing about social media is that everyone has a voice. The worst part about social media is that everybody has a voice, and it's definitely this weird balance that you have to strike in a position of power, I would have to imagine. What would you say, Tony? We got a couple more minutes here. What would you say has changed in your approach over these last 6 years, and how you go about building an episode of AEW Dynamite?
It's a great question. Well, I think that, for me, it's one thing that's added is the simulcast aspect of it. So it hasn't really changed the format because the show is still on TBS. The break structure is a little bit different if you watch a show on TBS versus Max, but it's still the same show. You might just get different commercials, and with TBS, you still have the picture-in-picture availability. The big changes to the show have been the people sometimes that are in the ring. I do think that we've been consistent trying to present great matches and great moments and having great stories from pay-per-view to pay-per-view, from show to show, week to week. And what's changed the most has been adding Collision and having another place where there's great matches and another A show, having 2 A shows on TV where we have huge matches, huge moments, and there's flow. And it's very different. When we started, we had Dynamite and we had Dark. And Dark was not the A show that Dynamite is. It wasn't presented the same way. We didn't have as many big championship fights. There were storyline developments, but if they happened, they would usually be recapped on Dynamite to show that there's things happening throughout the week, not on Dynamite, but, helping us move stories along and have another place to have great matches in addition to Dynamite. Well, now we have something so much bigger than that. We have another top program that's building momentum, that's had a great audience on TNT, and that is Collision. And Saturdays have become a huge day in AEW. I think really a great role that the show is on in 2025. I think we're doing our best work on Collision. So that has been a major change in how we present Dynamite. Now, not only recapping some things that happened on Collision, but having story flow from Dynamite to Collision to Dynamite to Collision to Dynamite. And I think that's really exciting. And it's helped, especially in an era when we started with 4 pay-per-views, and we originally just had Double or Nothing, All Out, Full Gear, and Revolution. Well, then adding more great events that have really been a positive addition to AEW, and we've had some great events that weren't on the original calendar with Dynasty, Forbidden Door, Wrestle Dream, World's End, and of course AEW All In. And these are some of our top events, and some of our best matches ever have been at those shows that weren't in the original AEW pay-per-view calendar in 2019. So having another 2 hours of TV week to week helps us a lot, presenting stories and having a great flow from pay-per-view to pay-per-view, from TV to TV.
I'll leave you with this one, Tony, because I know we got to wrap up here. When the book of AEW is written 40, 50, 60 years from now, what is the legacy you'd like people to take away from AEW Dynamite?
What a great question. I hope that AEW Dynamite is on for many, 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 many more years. And I hope that whenever I leave this planet, it's still on. And I hope it'll be on for a long, long time to come. 289 episodes this Wednesday is a huge milestone. To have such a great show with such big matches on the card, and something that we'll be able to hold up and look back on, just like I look back at some of the other great milestone shows. I look back at the first Winter is Coming, and I'm so proud of what we did that night in Jacksonville. I look back at the first Grand Slam in Arthur Ashe Stadium the next year in 2021, and that is such a great show. I'm so proud of what we did there and those matches and those moments, and I think this will be another show that we'll be really proud of this Wednesday night for Spring Breakthrough.
AEW Dynamite, 289 episodes, still going strong. Tony Khan, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for doing this, John. It's great to see you.